Evening, everyone. Welcome to The Next Revolution. I'm Steve Hilton. This is the home of positive populism, pro-worker, pro-family, pro-community, and then this weekend especially pro... These two men, Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller, lied, cheated, killed people, destroyed communities, all in pursuit of economic power. They were known as the robber barons of capitalism, and they hated that. So they set about changing their image. They wanted people to forget about all the terrible things they did. So Carnegie built public libraries, Rockefeller set up foundations. They found a way to con the establishment into moving on. And that's what we're seeing today with these two. Bush and Biden want you to forget about what they did. They're desperate for praise and pats on the back from the establishment, but unlike the original robber barons, who at least did some good with their deflection tactics, from Bush and Biden, it is entirely negative. In the past few days, they have cynically come together to attack a common enemy, Republicans. Disgracefully, George W. Bush used the anniversary of 9/11 to imply that Republicans, the people who put him in the Oval Office, are like the 9/11 terrorists. And no, he didn't just mean those who committed crimes. Bush knew perfectly well how his remarks would be amplified. He intended to smear the Republican base. What a sick, cynical, transparently self-interested ploy to ingratiate himself with the media and the political establishment. Does Bush really think it's going to make Americans forget what he did? Instead, it's done the exact opposite. It prompts us to remember that George W. Bush let Osama bin Laden slip through his fingers in December 2001 because Bush was too busy dialing up plans for the invasion of Iraq. We remember that Bush took us to war in Iraq on a lie, and according to those around him at the time, he did it just to look tougher than his father, an actual war hero. We remember that Bush's war of vanity squandered the sympathy and unity of the civilized world after 9/11. We remember, we will never forget, however many portraits he paints or speeches he makes, sucking up to the establishment and its elitist groupthink. We will never forget that George W. Bush caused the death of millions needlessly, that he destabilized the Middle East pointlessly, that he took trillions of dollars of your money corruptly and put it in the pockets of his cronies, led, of course, by the Cheneys, whose family business is war, fought by other people and their children. Biden said he wanted to end a war, not just overseas, but here at home.
We must end this uncivil war that pits red against blue, rural versus urban, conservative versus liberal.
Well, just as his abject surrender to the Taliban has not stopped but restarted the endless war as Afghanistan once again becomes a safe haven for terrorists, Biden is not ending our uncivil war, but reviving it. He picks a fight over the pandemic, hoping we'll forget about the chaos he created at the southern border, the humanitarian crisis, the security crisis, the immigration crisis. He thinks we'll forget about his crime crisis, his inflation crisis. He thinks we'll forget that he was elected on a pledge to bring the country together, and yet every single thing he says or does is designed to drive us further apart. He thinks we'll forget that he was elected as a moderate, a centrist, and yet he's now the front man for the most extreme, far-left, centralizing federal government expansion in American history. Biden thinks we'll forget that he can barely string two sentences together. When he can, they make no sense, even in the moment that he's trying to distract us from his lies and failures.
The bottom line, we're going to protect vaccinated workers from unvaccinated co-workers.
What? Protect the vaccinated from the unvaccinated? Yeah, it's called a vaccine. Can we just stop for a second and describe accurately what we saw there on Thursday? Either we saw a president who went off script and made something up that directly contradicts science and the stated aims of his administration, or it was in the script and he successfully read it out. In which case, we have an entire White House operation that has the President of the United States saying things that contradict science and the stated aims of the administration. This is not a joke, folks. This is a crisis of governance. In the very act of trying to get us to move on, Biden reminds us why we must not. And of course, more than anything, that applies to his greatest catastrophe, his cruel, narcissistic bid to be the guy who stopped the endless war at any cost, whether that's dead Marines in Afghanistan or another 9/11 plotted there, or Americans and our allies stranded behind enemy lines, desperate, fearing for their lives in the hands of those who attacked us 20 years ago. What a grotesque way to commemorate the bravery, the heroism, the sacrifice of so many Americans, not just on that day, but in the 2 decades since. Biden surrendering to the Taliban, leaving our people behind, leaving our military equipment behind, leaving our morality behind. This appalling Biden regime, cruel, weak, incompetent, still can't seem to comprehend the gravity of what they've done. Listen to this from the State Department when challenged about why they're not letting planes take off and getting Americans out. This is an actual official statement released last Sunday. Quote, "We understand the concern that many people are feeling as they try to facilitate further charter and other passage out of Afghanistan. However, we do not have personnel on the ground. We do not have air assets in the country. We do not control the airspace, whether over Afghanistan or elsewhere in the region." Yeah, exactly. That's the whole point. You ran away, and now you can't help Americans. And you're talking about it as if it's just some kind of immutable fact of life. No, you took the personnel off the ground. You took the air assets out of the country. You're the ones who did this. And now you turn around and wring your hands about it? You really are the lowest of the low. Or actually, no, there was a lower point. What was the word the White House used to describe the murderous, torturing terrorists they handed Americans over to? Professional. Professional? Here's a word for that. Despicable. Just like their drone strike, a shameless political move straight out of that movie, Wag the Dog. We are now learning the Biden regime mistook water canisters for bombs and killed an aid worker and 9 other civilians. And this is their great over-the-horizon anti-terror strategy. It's not so much over the horizon as somewhere over the rainbow. God help us next time if they're looking at bombs and think they're water canisters. And then they have the nerve to suggest that all this strengthens America because it frees us up to concentrate on the real threat from China. They're right about the threat, but the idea that this weak, feckless Biden regime will ever stand up to China, well, all you need to know about that is the readout from Biden's phone call with Xi Jinping this week. This is an actual quote from a White House official. Biden sought to explain U.S. actions towards China, quote, "in a way that is not misinterpreted as somehow trying to sort of undermine Beijing in particular ways." So that's Biden's strategy on the threat that his whole Afghan disaster was supposed to enable him to protect us from, not somehow sort of undermining Beijing. No wonder there are reports that China is taking over Bagram, the strategic asset that Biden just gave up overnight. Biden is totally out of his depth. He is nothing but a corrupt machine politician with no principles, no integrity, no decency. His entire presidency is a fraud. He said he'd bring compassion, but instead gave us cruelty. He promised competence, but delivered chaos. He was elected as a moderate centrist, but the minute he's sworn in, it's a far-left socialist takeover. He was running around yesterday complaining about the F Biden signs he saw from his convoy. Honestly, considering the damage he's done to this country, that is a mild rebuke. As we said last week, if he won't resign, he must be impeached. Tell us what you think at Steve Hilton X and at NextRev FNC, and share this message when we post it later. All right, let's bring in our guest, one of the partners in Project Dynamo, working to rescue trapped Americans from Afghanistan, Jen Wilson, along with former State Department spokesperson Morgan Ortagus and Fox News contributor Tammy Bruce. Jen, let's start with what's happening. I mean, you know better than any of us. They want us to move on. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, we haven't moved on. We've been working, 48-hour shifts with no sleep, literally with no sleep. I mean, we've basically had to roll up a private airline and a travel agency in a span of 3 weeks because we have over 20,000 requests for evacuation just through our website alone. And that's Americans, that's green card holders, that's NATO passport holders. There are I can't even count how many pregnant females that we're trying to evacuate. It's definitely not over. And we've had to roll it up and fund it. So it's been a hell of a 3 weeks, but we're not done.
Well, I mean, it's just incredible what you and so many of your colleagues are doing. Let me just ask you specifically. I mean, they're telling us there's about 100 Americans left. We're going to get them out. State Department's working. We trust the Taliban. I mean, when you hear that, and then you know what's going on there. I mean, and tell us about the Americans. I worry about those who, you know, we don't even hear from, or, you know, they're not all in Kabul or next door to an airport, or we can't even get to an airport. They're somewhere around the country in hiding because they're so frightened. Tell us what's really going on.
Yeah, I mean, we're in constant communication literally all day, every day with the trapped Americans. And you're right, they do span, you know, the entire confines of that country. They're not just in Kabul. They're not just in Mazar-e Sharif. They're not just in Herat. They are all over. I don't want to get into numbers because of how many there are. But we have a lot. Like I said, of Americans, of green card holders, NATO passport holders, and every shape, color, and creed of Afghan national that you can imagine. Civs, civ in process, Ps in process, humanitarian parole, refugee status. I mean, they weren't planning on this to happen. So many of them, their children don't have passports. You don't have a chance of getting out of that country or any neighboring country on any airplane without a passport. And there are no embassies there anymore. So an enormous swath of these people are stuck in some bureaucratic hell, and we're the ones trying to help them facilitate exit. But we also have our hands tied because we aren't a government agency. We cannot deal with visas, and I mean that's the heartbreaking conversation we have all day, every day. Is I can't approve your visa. I can't help you get one. I don't have any way of doing any of that. And it's so frustrating.
I mean, we can all see it and hear it in your voice, but I mean, to me, it's enraging as well. I mean, you're just fighting the good fight to try and make this happen. Anyway, let's stay with us for a second, Morgan. I want to switch, if I may, to the strategic picture, because another aspect of this that we're constantly told by the Biden regime is, oh, well, it's fine because now we can really focus on China. We don't have to worry about Afghanistan anymore. That's done. We can really. I mean, what do you make of that? That this actually somehow strengthens America's standing in the world?
It makes no sense. I mean, even the Europeans, the British, the Germans, you know, have scolded us on this exit. You know, NATO, it's funny because in the Trump administration, we were told that we were going to break NATO. And this decision to leave Afghanistan in the manner that we did and the way we did is what really got close to breaking NATO more than anything. You know, just to expand upon what Jennifer was saying, she's so right. Many of us are still trying to help when she talks about the passport issue. But here's one of the big challenges that we have, too. The State Department, the Secretary of State, has yet to publicly announce any asylum agreements, not one. So that means whenever Jennifer or I or anyone is trying to help get people, refugees out of Afghanistan, there's no safe third country to go to. Now, if you got out on U.S. planes, you know, they're at our American bases right now, of course, being processed around the Middle East and Europe. But if you're just a regular Afghan, if you're just a woman, right, you didn't work for the United States, but you were a woman in Afghanistan, you want to get out, there are no asylum agreements in place. And the other thing that I think, Steve, that we also really need to watch for as we look at the strategic picture that you talked about, we have a failing in diplomacy, that we have no asylum agreements in place. And we really have a counterterrorism failing. You know, here we are, we've had this catastrophe in Afghanistan, one of the worst foreign policy decisions of my generation, right, of anything I've seen in my lifetime. And we have no counterterrorism coordinator at the State Department. No one's been named. You would think, even over the past 3 weeks, that they would say, oh,
these are
crap,
the competent
maybe we should
people.
actually fill this position. Right, these are the adults in the room, supposedly. And
Exactly.
so why is that counterterrorism coordinator position, you know, important? Well, for obvious reasons, you know, because you're working with our allies, you're working across NATO, you're working across the U.S. government, looking at terrorism threats around the world. And now we have a huge terrorism threat likely to emanate out of Afghanistan that we didn't expect to happen. And so the fact that we still have, that we did this withdrawal without these key positions being in place, and now we have a potential huge terrorist threat that may emanate out of Afghanistan. We just saw ISIS kill our troops, of course, a few weeks ago in Afghanistan. And to not have key positions like a counterterrorism coordinator even named, much less going through Senate confirmation, this shows a huge lapse in judgment, in my opinion.
Well, thanks for pointing. I mean, you know, there's so many aspects. The more you dig, the worse it seems. Tammy, let's switch over to the politics, and then you know, we had 9/11 this weekend, of course. There was something that happened this weekend. I don't know why. It just really sort of pointed up the contrast, I think, between what we've seen from Biden and the White House over the past month or so, and what we had with President Trump. It was this picture with President Trump on 9/11. He chose to spend it with the police officers and fire department of New York, and just really look at that picture. You know, there's something about that photo of him. It just there's a strength there. I don't know what it is. It was very powerful to me. It really showed the contrast with this Biden regime.
You know, it sure did. And in addition to being there with a dynamic like that, he also went to some of the stations and saw the firefighters, the police officers, visited with them. You know, they love him. And this is about law and order. It's about love for the country. It's about the nature of what he represents as a reflection of the American people, right? The nature of who we are, what he had established versus the shocking contradiction when it comes to what Biden and his gang of fools have done to this country. You almost couldn't do this unless you intended to do this, like not having that coordinator that Morgan was talking about, like abandoning everyone when it comes to diplomacy and not having any agreements. These are people who've been in government for a very long time, and it's interesting that there is such chaos. But I would also say that when you're looking at, as an example, the charter planes in Mazar-i-Sharif, that have been held back. This refusal to allow landing rights in other countries. Fox News received an email from another rescue group that revealed that, saying we're not going to help you or facilitate it. And the question has to be why? Why not? And my belief is that the framework, like with a batterer, that you hear this phrase of, if I can't have you, no one will. In this case, I think it's a matter of, if we can't rescue you, we're not going to let anybody else do it. And so that's disgusting. What we've got here. I think it's jealousy, it's control, it's the fact that in that one particular instance, Glenn Beck was involved, visible conservatives, it's politics, that they see no one as human beings. They see no one worthy of saving. It's only about them, the news cycle, photo ops, what happened at the ground zero with them all shaking their hands. That was all it is. And so thank goodness for the civilian rescuers, for our retired military, for those working on to get people out, because there are thousands, and we've got to do it. And our State Department is actively resisting and impeding these efforts.
Well, that's what's so outrageous, and that's why I'm so happy, Jen. I mean, happy is maybe not the right word, but just so pleased that we could at least allow you to update us on what's actually happening, and we'll continue to do that, because the work you're doing, you know, it's the work the government should be doing. They're not doing it. You're doing it, and we appreciate it. Thank you, Jen and Morgan. Tammy, we'll see you a bit later on in the show. Just before we go, on this 9/11 anniversary weekend, I just wanted to share one of my most powerful memories from that time. It was actually 20 years ago today, on September the 12th. In London, where I then was, the Queen had her band play this outside Buckingham Palace for the first time in history. The California recall election is just days away. Yes, I know we love Larry Elder. We're proud to have hosted him here twice in recent weeks, but he's not the only Republican running, so we're going to bring you two of the other leading candidates tonight. First up, author of Recall Newsom, the case against America's most corrupt governor, California State Assemblyman Kevin Kiley. Good to see you again, Kevin.
Hey, Steve.
All right, people are going to vote. People are going to be voting on Tuesday. I have a feeling a lot of Republicans want to vote in person on Tuesday. There's still time to make your pitch, so off you go.
Yes, absolutely. And there's a real sense of urgency here, Steve. I mean, Gavin Newsom just said he's looking for a mandate. And make no mistake, he means a mandate for further mandates. So there is a real sense of urgency here for folks to cast your ballot, vote yes on question 1, and you can find my name, Kevin Kiley, on question 2. I've been a member of our legislature for the last 5 years. I've been fighting against the corruption and the dysfunction against the supermajority, the super-duper majority. The last year and a half, I've been fighting against Gavin Newsom's one-man rule. I took him to court and and sued him for abusing his emergency powers, and I'd know how to go about fixing our broken state government on day one, which would start, by the way, with finally ending the state of emergency. This is vitally important because they've pushed this recall off so long that it's only going to be a year before our next election. So we're going to need to act boldly and aggressively to immediately get California on a whole new course after this is successful.
Well, I agree, I certainly agree about that. What I want to know is, like, how have they treated you? Have they called you a white supremacist yet?
Well, look, they have tried to discredit and delegitimize this recall in every way they can. From the beginning, they called it the California coup. I'm not making that up. That's actually what they called it. They said we're trying to overturn a democratic election. One of the governor's allies started a pact to stop the recall called Stop the Steal. Another ally filed a lawsuit to try to cancel the vote altogether. They have attacked me. They've attacked Larry. They've attacked anyone associated with the recall, all in an attempt to delegitimize and discredit it. And the reason is because they know how threatening it is. This is a movement by the people of California to take control of their government back, to throw out a corrupt political class that has caused California's decline and failure for many years, and it's Gavin Newsom who has brought that decline into a total freefall. And so they know what's at stake. That's why special interests have given Newsom $70 million. That's why he's running ads with malicious lies that even the Associated Press called out as false. But we've overcome every single obstacle that's been thrown in our path so far, and I think we have a real golden opportunity to get this across the finish line in just 2 days.
Well, Kevin, you're absolutely right about the movement. It's going to keep going whatever happens on Tuesday. We appreciate you being here with us tonight. Thanks so much.
You bet.
All right, let's bring in our next guest, the man who faced off against Gavin Newsom in the 2018 gubernatorial race in California, John Cox. How you doing, John? Why should it be you?
Great to be with you. Great to be with you, Steve. It was a year ago that I talked to the organizers of the recall, and I thought that this was necessary to get this done. I wrote a big check, which got them through to a court date. And, you know, a year ago, Steve, this state was suffering under fires all over the place, a drought, a man-made drought, electricity blackouts, and, of course, the pandemic shutdowns, our kids out of school and everything. And I felt that the recall was necessary. And here we are a year later, and I think it is very necessary, and I hope the voters recognize that and still come out in the next couple of days and change the management of this state, which is desperately needed.
I'm looking at your backdrop there, and it features a bear, and I've seen your ads, and they feature a bear as well. But the substance of your ads is very interesting, and I want to ask you about that. What you're really emphasizing is the fact that you're a businessman, and that's what the state needs. Tell us about why you think that's so important.
Well, you know, California has tried career politicians, and they've tried celebrities and media stars. And now I know you like Larry and everything, but, you know, I think we need to do what a lot of other states around the country have done. You look at states like Massachusetts and Maryland, which are very blue states, but they have Republican businessmen as governors, and they're the most popular governors in the country. You also see Nebraska with Pete Ricketts, and Arizona with Doug Ducey, Tennessee, North and South Dakota. They all have business people as governors, Steve, and that's because we get the job done. I mean, this state is so badly run. We don't have enough water. We don't have enough electricity. Our housing crisis continues and has gotten worse under Gavin Newsom. Same with homelessness. Same with the wildfires and rising crime. You know, the politicians are the ones who have run this state into the ground, and I think it's not a good idea to replace them with another politician or, frankly, another media star who will make us feel good by attacking the other side. But I think the way for the Republican Party to get back into power in this state, Steve, is to demonstrate that we can actually fix things. There's 7 million voters in this state who are unaffiliated. They're not Republicans. They're not Democrats. They just want a better life. And I think the way for Republicans to come back is to get into power, get a governor who's a businessman, show that we can get the job done, show that we can improve the schools, show that we can deliver water and electricity and housing and all these things. And then the voters will trust us to continue to do the things that we need to do, and we'll bring this state back. That's the way through as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I think it's a very clear message. I think there's no dispute about anything you're saying there about the state being badly run. We'll see if they think you're the one to fix it. John, great to see you this evening. Thank you very much. All right, you can see extended conversations with John and Kevin Kiley, as well as Larry Elder and Caitlyn Jenner, and also Kevin Faulconer, who was formerly mayor of San Diego, another leading candidate. They're all on my new podcast, California Rebel Base. Make sure you subscribe. Apple. One of the interesting things about the California recall is that despite the lies from Gavin Newsom, it's not just Republicans demanding change. Independents, Democrats, progressives, they are all sick of the cruelty and incompetence from years of Democrat one-party rule. A great example of that broad-based resistance is Michael Schellenberger. He's the author of the new book, San Francisco, Why Progressives Ruin Cities. I spoke to him earlier. Take a look. I can't tell you how much I love both the title of your book, but also the subtitle, which is so interesting. When we first talked about it, I think I got it slightly wrong, and I said how the left and the Democrats and the progressives have sort of made such a mess of things. He said, no, it's about why. Tell us why that's important.
Well, sure. Well, as you know, I've been a lifelong progressive. It's only recently that I've decided that I can't be a progressive anymore because of the damage that's occurred in California. I mean, we have over 160,000 people on the streets or in shelters. Vast majority of them are on the streets, probably about 120, 140,000 people in California, many suffering from serious mental illness and drug addiction. People are dying from overdoses and poisonings. All of this has been enabled by 30 years of progressive policies. There's efforts still by Democrats to blame Republicans for it, but obviously Democrats have had a supermajority in the legislature. They've controlled the governor's mansion for over a decade. So this is clearly on progressives, and I think the bottom line is just they've basically removed any accountability from people's personal behaviors. And so the question used to be, you know, how do we mix carrots and sticks to make sure that people follow the law and obey basic civil norms? Now we've seen it completely degenerate, where we're basically enabling people literally to camp out and shoot hard drugs, meth, fentanyl, heroin in front of City Hall in San Francisco. It's spilled over into the rest of San Francisco, Los Angeles, Sacramento. All of California's major cities are basically suffering from what we call open-air drug scenes, euphemistically referred to as homeless encampments.
And I think you could see that same mentality applied to some of the other issues where you've seen a real really disastrous results.
Yeah, you absolutely have it right. In 2019, when Governor Gavin Newsom was blaming President Donald Trump for so-called climate denial because Trump said the main issue is that you have to do better forest management, Gavin Newsom said that Trump was a climate denier. In truth, at that very moment, Governor Newsom was cutting the budget for fire prevention in California's forests. As a result, in 2020, California reduced the amount of land it treated for fires by a full half. And so we see this pattern repeating itself. They underfund fire treatment, forest management, and they blame climate change. They fail to maintain a proper amount of natural gas or nuclear power plants to provide reliable electricity, and we have blackouts, which they then blame on climate change.
And so let's just get back to the sort of the final quick point. You know, San Francisco, you know, such a great title, such a great argument. Why do they behave like? Why is it that you've got this phenomenon of such appalling governance?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely financial interests here at stake, financial interests that make money on this problem. I mean, you have to remember we spend more per capita on mental health in California than any other state, but we have the worst outcomes. We also have, you know, just a desire to feel powerful by controlling other people, particularly we saw that during the pandemic, but we've seen it with homelessness.
Yeah.
But I think there's something else, Steve, that we've seen, which is that progressives have really elevated caring and compassion above all other values. And the truth of the matter is that love is not all we need. We also need discipline. We also need hard work. We need the law. We need respect for the law. And we've seen that. We've seen respect for the law. We've seen respect for basic civil norms be undermined chronically across California. I think it's fair to say that this is a new religion, that progressives have turned compassion and caring without requesting anything in return up to a level of a substitute religion for really religions that used to have a better balance between, let's say, Old Testament and New Testament, carrots and sticks. We now see it's just an emphasis on caring and loving without any consequences or discipline. We know that's not how you raise kids right. We also know that that's not how you can maintain a proper functioning society.
Wow, that is just so deep and so smart and so completely on the money. Michael, congratulations on the book. Really pleased you could be here tonight with us. All the best and see you soon.
Thanks, Steve. Great being here.
Most notable features of the California recall is that some polls show the only racial group in overall favor of kicking Newsom out is Latinos, despite the usual smears from Democrats that anyone who doesn't support them is a racist, white supremacist, or whatever. Joining us now to talk about all that and more, co-host of the California Rebel-based podcast, Kristen Garcia-Dumont, and Tammy Bruce is back with us as well. Kristen, I mean, the Democrats, they totally take the Latino vote for granted. But suddenly it's not looking so good for them. You're Mexican-American. What's going on?
That's exactly right. You know, it's pretty exciting. 54% of Latino voters in California want to kick this guy out. They're done. You're absolutely right. They're done being taken for granted. And he sees these polls, and Gavin's panicked. He's worried. So he's, you know, all of a sudden frantically running around this weekend, trying to find any Latino community that he can find, so he can do a photo op, say a couple words in Spanish, I don't know, eat a burrito, whatever racist trope his handlers told him to do. And, you know, we see through it. Where has that clown been for the last 18 months while we suffered? Latinos took COVID on the chin. We suffered the most in health outcomes and in economic outcomes. And where was Gavin? When my kids couldn't go to school and his were in private school, where was Gavin? When our businesses were shut down, where was Gavin? He had the nerve to tell us not to have Thanksgiving dinner, yet he's off, you know, gallivanting at the French Laundry with a $15,000 wine bill. You know, this is a guy who kept churches and schools closed and strip clubs open. This guy's a joke.
Well, there we are. And people will have to have their verdict on Tuesday. Tabby, you escaped California. We miss you here, but you escaped. But you know a lot about how Democrats operate in this state. What's your take on the recall election overall?
Well, I do come back every now and then because, look, it's a beautiful state. It is worth saving. We can't abandon it. It is an important part of American history with all the mix of who we are as Americans. And so, yes, I mean, it's a magnificent place. But for me, and having been involved somewhat in the Gray Davis recall, is that we know that Californians in general, we still are rebels at heart. We want freedom. And this is what's interesting about the Hispanic community, is that generally it's about fleeing tyranny from South Central America. It's about wanting the freedom to be able to find the dream for your family, which is what every American family wants. They're a group of people of faith. And they noticed when they couldn't go to their churches. And all of this felt like and smelled like the tyranny that they or their ancestors fled so many years ago. And it's about standing up for what it is you've given everything up for. And there's a passion to that. And that is part of what, of course, makes this country great. But what I'm thinking for California, and because so many people have left, is I'm not sure when it comes to the electorate who is there. This is about a get out the vote effort. It is about passion. And this is, they want to make it Gavin Newsom versus Larry Elder, but it's not. It's Gavin Newsom versus the future. My God, choose whomever you want. There's over 40 people on that ballot. You heard from Kylie and from Cox earlier. These are great guys. Everybody who wants a chance to do better. That's what Californians have to give themselves as a gift just for 1 year, because there's another election next November in 2022. Yeah. You know, give someone a chance. Californians are still the Wild West. We love our state. We know what's possible. We've seen it governed well. This is not normal what has happened here. Everyone deserves better, because that election will affect the entire country. It's about saying to your fellow Americans, no matter where they come from, we are here for you. We get it. We're going to try this, but let's do this together.
And it's about saying we care about people more than we care about political parties.
That's right.
And Kristen, just one quick last thought from you. Biden is coming here. I think that is still on to help, inverted commas, Gavin Newsom tomorrow. What do you think? Is he going to help?
I don't. And, you know, as a Latino, I find the whole thing so offensive. I mean, I think Biden is a fundamentally very racist man. He made this horrible comment that the press really just glossed over about how Latinos don't want to get vaccinated because we're all scared we're going to be deported. You know, this is somebody who, to his core, thinks that the Latino community is just made up of entirely illegal immigrants. And, you know, we're sort of nothing to him. So, you know, it just really is fitting that somebody like that would come out to campaign for Gavin, because they don't have any regard for the Latino community.
Well, there you are. We'll see. We'll follow it. And I think for both of you, you know, what you're capturing there is this people's movement against this unbelievably tyrannical rule that has just taken people for granted because they haven't had a challenge until now. Now the challenge is there, and it's just going to continue. Kristen and Tammy, thank you both. Really appreciate that. We'll be right back after this. And a reminder that you can catch Kristen with me on the podcast twice a week. I think you'll enjoy it.
Well, she was hated when she was in San Francisco. She's always been hated. She was our district attorney in San Francisco, and nobody could stand her then. And everybody knew that she was a political shill. She was totally empty. She stood for nothing. She said whatever she needed to say to get elected. And I think America knew that right away. That's why she's always polled so terribly.
So to promote the podcast, we had a little fun with Gavin Newsom's hair this weekend. As you can see, we removed it and asked if the voters would give him a haircut in the recall. Well, who knows? I'll tell you who knows. Comedian and podcast host Adam Carolla. Adam, what's going to happen on Tuesday?
Oh, I hope Gavin Newsom goes away and never comes back. That would be so nice. I'm a lifelong Californite. I've lived here my entire life, and things have never been this bad. Homelessness, joblessness, the schools, the graffiti. Another thing people don't really talk about with California, it's dirty. There's trash everywhere. There's graffiti everywhere. There's homeless tents everywhere. It's really tough just to travel and see what it's become.
And it's interesting, so there's a phrase that really stuck in my mind from, we had a couple of the candidates on earlier, John Cox. That phrase, I use it the whole time, it's just so badly run. And like, everyone agrees about that. It's not just Republicans. You could just look around, it's so badly run. And it feels like what's happening with this recall is that for a long time, they've got away with that because the virtue signaling, you know, if we say the right things about whatever, climate or gender or whatever, doesn't matter about the reality of what you're delivering. I think people are saying, no, we're sick of it. We actually do care now about what's happening.
Well, you know, the thing about California is it's so big and the topography is so amazing and the beach and the mountains and everything. It can absorb a lot of bad, but we're at our saturation point. So we really can, as California, absorb more than most states can absorb. We can be run more poorly than most states because at some point we'll end up just going down to Malibu and taking a swim, and we'll come back and we'll feel better about ourselves. But I always look at California as a beautiful blonde from high school who's now turned 40, and it's time to get a job.
Okay, well, what do you think? I mean, if it doesn't go the way that certainly Newsom doesn't go away after Tuesday, I still think that this recall has had a positive, it's been a useful thing. It's kind of started this movement. Because it's not just about the governor. You've got all these crazy people in, you know, district attorney and there in LA where you are, you know, it's going to take a long time to really turn things around. And this is just the start.
Yeah, it's a good start. I mean, just the fact that for a change, people are talking about it. There has been a movement going on in California for about a decade. It's people moving to Texas and Florida. But this is the first one where there's been a movement amongst people who aren't trying to move.
And so I think that, you know, when you see people say, well, it's just a Republican recall, that's the big line, isn't it, from the Democrats? It's just, and from Newsom, and branding as all Trump people. It's just not true. I mean, I meet people the whole time who just say, I've never, you know, I'm a Democrat, but I still can't stand him, and I'm sick of what's going on.
Well, let's just lean into it. Like, okay, Democrats, it's a Republican movement. We don't like failing schools. Republicans don't like the cost of housing. Republicans don't like gas that's over $5. Let's just make a Republican movement. Good. We like to run cities and states efficiently. Fine. Let's own it. Republicans would like to live in a good state. Okay, fine.
I think this is actually one of the smartest things I've heard for a long time. Because the Republican Party itself has basically sort of died in this state, as far as I can tell.
Well, there's more Republicans in California than there are in Texas. I mean, there is a lot of Republicans in California. If you want to know, remember when they threw the egg at Larry Elder a couple days back when he was walking through Venice? Venice is as blue as it gets. Orange County is the only bastion of red there is. Would you rather live in Venice or Orange County? That's the question.